Welcome to this special broadcast that we're hosting here today entitled Principled Politics. And so we're going to be doing things a little bit differently than we normally do on Sundays. And there will be no communion broadcast. We're going to have communion here locally, and there will also be no shout outs. Is that all I'm going to be doing for this broadcast is just going straight through the presentation, because in all honesty, I don't know how long it's going to take. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with that right now with a little short video. And Val, make sure to mute me for that. Well, without a doubt that I prepared more for this message than any message I've ever have in my career of being a pastor for almost 50 years now. And so it's been a long week for me, a longer week for probably my wife. But we're talking here today about how to choose, and particularly making principled politics or principled political decisions as a Christian. There's a passage of scripture in the book of Proverbs, chapter 27:17, that says this: as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And I owe a debt of gratitude to a lot of thinkers who have helped me as I have developed this presentation. I appreciate Dr. Tim Stratton, who is a friend and colleague of mine in the Reasonable Faith Ministry. And he really got me thinking about the concept of when it comes to politics, is there an objective good? And so in other words, is there a real good with respect to politics? When we think about political matters, there's a whole spectrum of different varieties of political systems. There's communism and socialism and democracy. And it's not just like, we can choose amongst those and those are all equally valid. Is that if, in fact, there is such a thing as an objective good, then there is one political system that is more in line with that than others. And so I appreciate Dr. Stratton planting that seed. He's the director of Free Thinking Ministries, and so he planted that seed in my mind when I was listening to one of his podcasts. I also appreciate Jerry Johnson. Again, with the Ministry of Reasonable Faith, I am a chapter director of that Christian organization, which is really a philosophical organization, an apologetics organization, where we seek to give a thoughtful and reasoned and winsome response to objections about Christianity and the Christian point of view. And so the other day in our little group that we have, it's a private Facebook group, that I posted a question: hey, can anybody help me out with some good resources on how to think, how to have a Christian informed position on the whole political question? And it was Jerry Johnson who recommended the book Politics, a biblical, let me see, I can't remember exactly the title. Politics, I got it right here. Politics According to the Bible by Dr. Wayne Grudem, who teaches in Arizona at a university there. I've reached out to him to talk to him personally about some of these as of yet, we haven't been able to connect because he's a busy man, and and I'm not that. I mean, I'm just a pastor in a church somewhere, and so, but I'm grateful for him and his work that he's done on this. Really got me thinking a lot about these particular issues. And then there have been others along the way, but I also want to express my appreciation to Janice. She, has just been really a wonderful partner in ministry and very patient with me this week because I have been really not accessible much at all, and haven't been sleeping much either. Got up at 5:30 this morning because I thought, oh, there's some finishing touches that I need to put on the message, and so I sneaked into my office and began working again this morning. So if I fall asleep in church, that will be my opportunity to do that, because you folks have had plenty of opportunities to do that with me before. So those are just a few of the folks that I wanted to express appreciation for, and I've even had some pushback from folks who've had questions and also criticism about the whole concept that I'm presenting here today, and I welcome that. Truth invites investigation, and if I'm just voicing mere opinion, well then you can just chalk that up as that's just his opinion. But if anything that I talk about here today does ring true, then I invite you to push back or challenge or ask some questions, and we'll actually have a vehicle for you to do that in the message. But before we do anything, I would like to just spend a moment in prayer. Father in heaven, be with us today as we work through this presentation, and give us clarity. Help me to have clarity of thought in how I communicate. And I pray for those who are listening, that I pray that you'll bless them with clarity in their own minds, and give them open hearts and open minds to give fair consideration to the matters about which I'm speaking. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Benjamin Franklin said this: "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become more corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters." Boy, that's a chilling quote right there. Is that as nations become more corrupt and vicious, and certainly we see that. One of the things, my wife has always given me reports, and she's on a number of Facebook groups, and she's on a Facebook group that is here local, and people are always popping off on that group. And she says, I'm just amazed how mean-spirited people are. And this whole issue of civility in our culture has been lost. And I think too, in a large part, people say stuff on social media that they'd never say to your face. And it's really amazing to me. But what Franklin says there is really significant. He says that as nations become more corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. We're talking about how to choose here today, and particularly with the upcoming presidential election with Trump or Harris, and just a whole lot of kind of vitriol on both sides, and not just coming from them, but also coming from their supporters. So whoever kind of like lands in one camp or another. And as I've listened, and that's one of the things I always try to do, I really do try to listen carefully to people's points of view and what they're saying. And oftentimes the debate about which candidate is more fit for office really swirls around their character, personality, or identity. Can I be very frank with you just for a moment? Is that I'm not impressed with the character of either of these candidates. Matter of fact, the first time that Trump got into office, I wrote an open letter and posted it out on the web somewhere about about my concerns with respect to his character. And so, but as I also, it's important to understand that I live in California, and I've kind of witnessed and followed Kamala Harris's career over her political career over the years. And I actually know a person who has spoken to her personally when she was the Attorney General here in California and advocated on an important social issue. So sat down with her face to face and had a chance to talk with her. And so also, I'm just not impressed with her character. Now, a friend of mine just the other day said, well, that here's a link to all of the bad stuff about Trump. And I just don't know how to go through the moral calculus of who's worse. Because when you really look into Harris's background, there's a lot of stuff in her background that's not very noble either. And so I'm not interested at this stage in the game in who has the worst character. I'll tell you why in a minute. But with respect to their personalities, that neither one of them have a personality that I find that I would really like to hang out with them. And then we have all of those who fall into the identity camp. Well, I'm going to vote for Harris because she's a woman. Or I'm going to vote for Harris because she's a person of color, or whatever. And what I'm saying is that none of those are good reasons to select any political candidate. At the end of the day, the best reason to select a political candidate is their policies. Now, I want to talk about this issue of character for a moment, because I remember Carter's presidency. I'm old enough to remember that. And as far as a man of character, he even taught Sunday school, you know. So as a man of character, I think that you'd find him to be a very congenial and a great Christian person. But he was a horrible president, in my opinion. Absolutely horrible. Is that I remember when, and I even looked it up, I documented everything that I'm sharing with you today. And if you're interested in the documentation on that, I can provide that to you. But during Carter's presidency, mortgage rates reached around 18.5% in October of '81. Now, and I also remember under Carter's presidency, the Iranian hostage crisis. And it was just such a botched thing that, that Carter oversaw. And so character at the end of the day, well, it's important with our leaders, is that I also want to have a leader that demonstrates a high level of competency for the complex issues that face American politics. Now, when it comes to character and competency, or at least when it comes to competency, is that neither one of these guys, Trump or Harris, would fall in the category of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. A matter of fact, my wife has an uncle, or he's deceased now, but that who was named after him. He's America's only three-term president. He served for 12 years until he had a stroke and it took him out. And that, and so I was watching a special the other day, and I didn't know this stuff about him, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and for those who don't kind of remember, he was the president during World War II. And I think that he really did a masterful job in kind of like guiding America through those turbulent years in World War II. And also, I have a little bit of, I'm not so hot on the whole Yalta conference. Is it Yalta or the Potsdam? I can't remember for sure, but it was the one where kind of we say, okay, this is your territory, Stalin. The what? Yeah, but and it's interesting that the Allies were Roosevelt, Churchill, and who? Stalin. I mean, I find that to be fascinating. So, but he served for, and he is actually the president that triggered the 22nd Amendment. And the 22nd Amendment says, no president can serve for more than two terms. Is it 2 consecutive terms or 2 terms total? Okay, 2 terms total. But then I was watching this, Janice and I were watching this special the other day, and let me see if I can remember her name now. It's Lucy, huh? Yeah, but she has a kind of like a hyphenated name. No, it's not a middle name. And let me just get over here to AI for a moment, because here we go. Is that Lucy Mercer Rutherford? Now, how many here know anything about Lucy Mercer Rutherford? Janice does, yeah. She was Eleanor Roosevelt's social secretary. And she was Franklin Roosevelt's mistress. As a matter of fact, she almost tanked his political career before it even took off, because Roosevelt was already involved with her before he became president. And Eleanor found out about it, and Roosevelt was in a panic, and he didn't want Eleanor to leave him because he understood the political ramifications to his career. And so Eleanor stuck with him, and he probably made all sorts of kind of promises, which he broke, because they saw each other throughout his presidency. And guess who was with Roosevelt when he died? Lucy Mercer Rutherford. So Roosevelt was a highly competent leader, but not very moral man. Today our focus is going to be on how to make principled political decisions that are in keeping with Christian values. I'm not going to be telling you who to vote for, but I will be honest about various candidates' kind of orientation on things as we go through this presentation. The Bible informs all aspects of the Christian life, including our politics, and Christian disciples seek to act accordingly. Now, you may not have, if you're watching this online, you may not have Christian values, and that's okay. But if you are a Christian, I would urge you to weigh very carefully how your Christian values inform your politics. Now, I've never done this before in ministry, but I'm putting up my phone number. And that if you have any questions about this presentation, is that all sincere and respectful questions will be considered, but any rude or argumentative text will be blocked. So you can text me, don't call me because I will not answer your phone call. But you can text me if you have a question, and I will respond to your text as long as it's a sincere and respectful question. Or you can send it to me via email at the email address there. So when it comes to this whole question of separation of church and state, and I hear this a lot from Christians, and quite honestly, is that when I was preparing for this message, I told Janice, is that I really feel bad. And she says, why is that? I says, I really feel bad because I feel like I failed as a minister. Because I adopted a particular point of view about how a minister should approach political questions in teaching in his ministry. And I said, I'm at the place in my life now where I realize that I've failed the congregations that I've ministered in because I haven't helped them to develop a principled approach to politics that's biblically informed. And one of the things that you constantly hear Christians misunderstand is the question about the separation of church and state. And we will make that clear as I go along here today. But do you know where that idea originated? It's not in our Constitution. It's not in the Declaration of Independence. Do you know where that idea originated? It originated with Jesus. He says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. And so in Jesus' mind, there are two domains. There's the domain of what belongs to Caesar, and there's the domain of what belongs to God. And he says, give to each one of those appropriately what belongs to them. But this does not mean that Christians should take a hands-off approach to politics, as we will see as we go through a deeper understanding of the Bible than just quoting, well, what about the separation of church and state? And I'm telling you right now that we have been indoctrinated as a populace that this whole concept of the wall of separation is that Christians are to be quarantined in their worship services, but when it comes to the public square, you can't have a voice and you can't have input and you can't have significant influence. And I'm saying that that idea of just kind of like talking about politics amongst church members or Christians is a completely wrong-headed approach to it, and I've been guilty of it far too long myself. So the question that we would have to ask is, what belongs to God? Well, Ephesians chapter 5, verse number 1 says, imitate God, therefore, in everything that you do, because you are his dear children. Let me just get clear about it. What belongs to God? My vote belongs to God. And that's our privilege when the government's power is derived from its people. Now, Peter and Paul and other Christian leaders, they did not live in a society where where governmental powers were derived. They lived in a totalitarian society that was ruled by the Romans. And so, but in a democratic society where, you know, and we've lost sight of this because we've got it flipped. Those guys in Washington, D.C., those guys in Sacramento, those guys in City Hall work for us. We don't work for them. That's what democracy is all about. And they answer to us. That's the way it should be. And so that my vote belongs to God. And I do not believe, I talked to a Christian the other day who said that, well, people of goodwill can differ about these topics. And I agree. People of goodwill can differ about these topics, but that does not mean that each opinion is equally right. If there's such a thing as Dr. Stratton talked about, if there's such a thing as the good, Some opinions are closer to that than others. And so even within American democracy, not every candidate is going to be reflect principled, and I'm not even going to say Christian. Not every candidate reflects principled politics as much as each other. Some are closer to principled politics than the others. You know, the whole thing about the separation of church and state was originated in a letter that Thomas Jefferson sent to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut in 1802. And there in that letter is where Jefferson uses the phrase, the wall of separation between church and state, which was intended to protect the church from government interference, not to prevent the church from government influence. So Jefferson was smart enough to know that as the government increases in power, it's going to encroach upon the church's freedom. And so we need that wall of separation to keep the government at bay. And so Christians should be free to influence government according to our beliefs. As a matter of fact, that the First Amendment guarantees that right for us. The wall of separation doctrine is not in the Constitution. However, it's worked its way into law at a variety of levels. But the Constitution says this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. What that means is that Congress cannot say all males who are 8 days old must be circumcised and become Jewish. Congress doesn't have that authority. Or Congress does not have the authority to say that all people in the United States of America need to take Christian communion every Sunday. You see, Congress cannot establish a religion like it did in Britain. We have the Church of England as the official religion in Britain, but in America, we have no Church of America. And I think that's wise, and we'll see as we go on. But it says also, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I listen to candidates very closely. And I'm telling you right now, watch out for any candidate who talks about the freedom of worship. Because when they're talking about the freedom of worship, you know what they're saying? You can do your church stuff in your congregations, but you can't influence political policy. The First Amendment guarantees the right of Christians of exercising our religion in the public square and influencing politics. As a matter of fact, Judeo-Christian values influenced our founding documents. When we're talking about principled politics, is that these were the principles that our founders went by. As a matter of fact, Judeo-Christian values influenced the founders with regards to their ideas about natural rights. We'll talk about all of this as we go along. We'll at least kind of hint at some of these things. Natural rights, moral law, the common good, divine providence, rule of law, checks and balances. You know why checks and balances are there? Is because Congress understood original sin. I mean, and the founders understood original sin. And they understood, hey, don't trust these guys. Don't trust politicians. And also justice and equality. And an important word, by the way, equality. You hear a lot of talk about equity nowadays. The two are not the same. Equity is about having equal outcomes. Equality is about being treated the same under the law. Judeo-Christian values shaped America. It was the context of the founders' thinking. Not all of the founders were Christians. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. Benjamin Franklin was a deist. I don't know the beliefs of all of them. Actually, a very strong Christian was James Madison. John Adams, he had some strong Christian viewpoints, but he was unorthodox in his understanding of the Trinity. And so there's a lot of stuff there. But, here's what I'm saying, is that it's all within the context of Judeo-Christian values and natural law, as we'll see in a moment. I'll tell you what didn't factor in. Socialism. Socialism wasn't even a thing back in those days. I had to look it up because, I thought, oh man, socialism really didn't come into America or even political theory until the early 1800s. By then, our Constitution had already been ratified and the Declaration of Independence had already been written. So there were no socialist thinkers amongst the founders. Certainly not any Marxists, because Marxism didn't arise until Karl Marx wrote his book Das Kapital, and I believe that was in 1848, long after America was founded. There were a number of socialist groups that sprang up in America in the early 1800s. The Shakers were one. The Harmony Society was another. Brook Farm was another. The Oneida community. Does anybody know anything? Have you ever heard the word Oneida before? Oneida silver, right? That's where it originated. The Oneida community, which was founded by John Humphrey Noyes in 1846 in New York, was an interesting group. They taught Christian perfectionism. They could be about as far from Christianity as you can get and still wear the name. But that's true of a lot of groups today. They practiced in their socialistic society called complex marriage. You know what that is? Everybody was married to each other. And so in their commune, that everybody was married. I guess we would have another name for that today, swingers. Christian swingers is what they were. And so they practiced communal living and communal property, and that also they practice I'm not going to go into a lot of it. I think I'll leave it at that. So the big question that we want to consider here this morning, or at least to get started, and I'm going to go until I'm done, or until the hour has been spent. What's the role of government is the first question that we have to ask. Thomas Jefferson, in my view, got it right. He says this in the Declaration of Independence: we hold these truths to be self-evident. So in other words, you don't have to prove these. It's an axiomatic truth. Just like in order to do mathematics, you just assume the theorems and then you go from there. He says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, so you can't surrender these rights and no one can take them away from you, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, you forfeit some of these rights when you violate the laws, but we'll see how all that factors in a little bit later in the presentation. But then Jefferson says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So according to Jefferson's thinking, Jefferson, in my viewpoint, was a political genius. He really was. And according to Jefferson's thinking, most of the founders were. But he understood that there are human rights that are not conferred upon us by government. And so the government can't take them away outside of due process. And here's a fun fact. Jefferson was age 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Man, we need more 33-year-olds like Jefferson in America today, who can think straight about important religious and political topics. And he understood that we're not talking to secure our rights. We're not just any rights, but rights that are endowed by their Creator. And if your rights are not endowed by the Creator, if your rights are given to you by the government, then they can take it away anytime they want to. And they don't have to have any due process. And more we see our government shifting to the idea that the government is the source of rights rather than God. But another purpose of government is to compel the good. Now, I've talked with some pretty influential people in our community about this concept, and we've had some good discussions. But part of the essence of government is to compel people to do things that they don't want to. That's why it's called law enforcement. They force you to do things that you may not want to do. This is taught in the Bible about compelling the good. In Romans 13, verse number 4, it says, "For the one in authority," so the government, "is God's servant." He says, they're only there because God has allowed them to be there for your good. But it says here, "But if you do wrong, then be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoers." So government is there to compel people to do good, and when they don't, to punish them as a result. This, by the way, speaks to the idea of objective or real morality. So in other words, governments should be compelling people to do what's really good, not just what the government says is good. And neither Peter nor Paul would say that the government always gets it right. I don't say that the government always gets it right. But they do say that as a general rule, government serves the good of the populace and restrains evil within society. Things like murder, theft, rape, and so on and so forth, so forth. There should be laws against those things. It's just not a matter of opinion. Those are really wrong. It's not just, they're wrong because the government says they're wrong. Peter talks about this too in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. He says, "Submit yourself to the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. Right and wrong. Real right and real wrong. That's what he's talking about here in that passage of Scripture. But I hear this even from Christians, wrong-headed Christians in my view, is that, well, you can't legislate morality. And I say, what should you legislate if you're not going to legislate morality? Popular opinion? What if popular opinion says that slavery is okay? What if popular opinion says that we need to rid our country of Jews? Many of our laws have a clear moral component. By the way, not all of our laws do, because there's such a thing as positive law. There's a difference between laws that are grounded in with a moral component, and then, like, why do we pay taxes on April 15th? There's no moral component to that, choosing that date. It's what's called positive law. The government just makes it up, and they could have chosen any date to make you pay taxes. But many of our laws do have a clear moral component. We legislate morality all the time. As a matter of fact, that's what they're trying to do now, is legislate a particular view of morality. And so we must legislate morality in order to be a just society. Let me say that one more time, is that we must legislate morality in order to be a just society. Governments always legislate morality, so the big question is, how do we know what's the good? And I think we can get some clear insight from philosophy and the Bible. What is good is not primarily civil law. With Plessy versus Ferguson, a Supreme Court decision in 1896, the Supreme Court set up the doctrine of separate but equal, and that's what led to the Jim Crow laws throughout the American South. So what's legal is not necessarily what's good. Let me say that one more time. What's legal is not necessarily what's good. And finally, the Supreme Court reversed that decision in 1954, a good year, by the way, with the ruling of Brown versus, I think, Topeka, Kansas. I have to look it up. I can't remember for sure. I know it's Brown versus, I think it's Brown versus the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas. So how do we know what's good? It's not primarily what the government has made law. One source of what's good is natural law. Paul talks about this in the book of Romans. Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15, he says, some people naturally obey the law's commands, talking about the moral law of God, even though they don't have the law, the moral law of God. This proves that the conscience is like a law written in the human heart. By the way, we have a name for people who have a defective conscience. Do you know what that is? Sociopath. I'm not kidding you. And so that the human conscience will show whether we are forgiven or condemned. Now, C.S. Lewis has some very interesting things to say about this. He is a Christian apologist, and he wrote, who was an atheist at one time. He said, I know that some people say that the idea of a law of nature or decent behavior known to all men is unsound because different civilizations and different ages have had quite different moralities, but this is not true. Think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing all the people who had been kindest to him. You might as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 make 5. Human beings have this innate sense of what's right and wrong. But the most remarkable thing is this. Whenever you find a man and usually someone who thinks they're sophisticated. Whenever you find a man who says he does not believe in real right and wrong, you will find that same man going back on this a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he will be complaining it's not fair before you can say Jack Robinson. You know, you can tell it. By the way, Lewis died the same day that Kennedy was assassinated. And so it's just a little fun fact, you know. So I really recommend finding this on YouTube and listening to it. It's Lewis's actual voice broadcasting this to Britain during the war, and this particular broadcast became the foundation for Lewis's incredibly popular book, Mere Christianity, the foundation for the first chapter of that. Our job as Christians is to persuade people of the good, not just merely a good, the way you think it is, but of the good. And that influencing government is not establishing religion. This is essential. Influencing government, Christians influencing government is essential to promote a more just society. If there's a real good out there, Christians should be vocalizing an understanding of that good. The campaign to abolish slavery in the United States and England was led by many Christians based on their religious convictions. But laws abolishing slavery did not establish a religion. So get it through your heads. I'm saying that in a nice way. But get it through your heads is that just because you're telling the government these are the good according to Judeo-Christian values, but you don't say that. These are the good. You make a principled and reasoned and persuasive case for that. Well, then it's not an establishment of religion. That's not what it is. It's an establishment of justice, is what it is. The campaign to end racial discrimination and segregation was led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a Baptist pastor who preached against racial injustice from the Bible, but laws against discrimination and segregation did not establish a religion in America. Dr. Martin Luther King says this about natural law. And read his letter from Birmingham jail. It says, one may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws? So people are griping to King, hey, you're a lawbreaker and obeying others. He says the answer is found in the fact that there are two types of laws. There are just laws and there are unjust laws. Plessy versus Ferguson. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what's the difference between the two? King asks. How does one determine when a law is just or unjust? He answers his own question here. A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that's out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in terms of St. Augustine, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal and natural law. Here's a fun fact. Many progressives in America today disavow King's dream of a colorblind society. Woke policies have now supplanted it with the concept of equity. King just said, I want you to be judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin. Woke policy says, no, it's your color of your skin that's important. Here are some issues that are informed by natural law. The right to life, natural marriage versus same-sex marriage. So the right to life versus abortion, natural law versus same-sex marriage, freedom of speech versus censoring speech, which, by the way, even one of our current political candidates has advocated censoring speech on social media. And even sex and gender. I was talking with a friend of mine just the other day, and I said, what's the first question that somebody asks when a child is born? Boy or girl. We talk about mothers and fathers. We talk about brothers and sisters. We talk about boys and girls. Sex is binary, and so is gender. Okay, you say, well, what about the anomalies? And I'd be more than happy to address those questions, but not in this broadcast, because I've done a lot of thinking about that particular issue too. When governments enact laws that are contrary to the good, justice demands that we seek legitimate means to change those laws. If the law is not rooted in the good, Plessy versus Ferguson, we should do all that we can to overturn those types of laws. And same with, and by the way, in America today, we have plenty of laws that, in my view, do not serve the good and therefore are unjust. What about Judeo-Christian values and the good? And I'm trying to get through this, but I'm running out of time, but I'm just going to go ahead and keep going until I'm done. But, you know, these concepts are important concepts, particularly in our day and age. Jesus says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. There are 4 mistaken views that Christians hold about politics. Number 1 is that the church should compel Christianity. Well, how can you compel love for God? Number 2, that Christians should keep out of politics. And I'm saying, if your voice is not going to be heard in politics, then who's going to advocate for the good? It just doesn't make sense. Number 3 is that Christians should focus on evangelism. And that's not what Jesus teaches. He says, you're the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And that just doesn't refer to evangelism. That also means advocating for the good. And number 4 is that Christians should focus on politics, and that's not right. Is that, you see, at the end of the day, the heart of the matter is the matter of the heart, and you cannot legislate people's hearts into right action. And no matter how many laws that you have about race, it's never going to change a racist's heart. It never will. So there's a better way, and that's to seek significant influence as a Christian. There are 3 primary voices that are seeking to be heard in American culture today. And one voice will primarily influence our understanding of the good. It will either be the progressive left, wokeism, which is rooted in Marxism. When you begin to understand where we've come in our culture today, is that wokeism is rooted in a concept called critical theory. I'm going to get to that in a moment. Critical theory, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So the other big voice that wants to be heard in America is Islam, and then we have those who care about natural law and Judeo-Christian values. Let's focus first on wokeism. The progressive left is rooted in critical theory, and that's Marxism, which is applied to social justice issues. The thinkers that developed critical theory, I can't remember the name of the school, the school of thought, that it's escaping my mind right now, but those thinkers understood that Marx failed because he made it all about economics. But if we can shift and make it about social matters like race and colonialism, things like that, then we can leverage society more and more in the direction of the Marxist ideal. So Marxism, woke is Marxism repackaged to make race and colonization the basis of all social inequities. And that's why you hear so many politicians say, well, you're just racist. If you don't think like me, you're a racist, you know. And that's why you'll hear politicians use slogans like this. This is a dog whistle for the progressive left. What can be unburdened by what has been? Do you understand what that saying? And one political candidate uses it quite frequently. What can be needs to be unburdened by what has been. And so we need to disconnect from old values and old way of thinking and reimagine America with a whole different foundation for doing our politics, which is rooted in wokeism. It's rooted in the progressive left. Here's what the progressive left believes. The good, according to the progressive left, includes DEI policies, ending systemic racism. Everybody wants to end racism, everybody of goodwill. Systemic racism in the mind of the woke is essentially Western civilization. That's what it is. The woke promote LGBTQ plus policies, reimagining law enforcement. One candidate, you heard a lot of talk about we need to reimagine law enforcement and criminal justice system. Women's reproductive rights, abortion. If abortion is a violation of fundamental law, natural law, where it's the taking of an innocent life, well then no law gives you the right to take an innocent life without sufficient justification. Or actually, no law gives you the right to take a life without justification. I could speak more about that, but I don't have time. The progressive left wants to curtail hate speech. How do you know what hate speech is? It's what the left says it is. And so we are going to outlaw your speech that we don't like. And it's also addressing climate change, immigration reform. I've been racking my mind about the immigration policies that we've had in America over the past few years, and I think I figured it out. That's more for another day. Education policies, enforcing approved viewpoints. That's what we have here in California, is that we have the approved viewpoints in public schools have now become a source of indoctrinating your children in a particular way of thinking. When all of this first dawned on me, I had a Habakkuk 3:16 experience. Do you know what that says? It says, I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. When I finally understood what's going on in America, is that I felt a lot like Habakkuk. Do you know what was happening in his time? The righteous people of Judea were being subjugated and oppressed. We're going to be subjugated and oppressed by those of Babylon. And what Habakkuk discovered is that God said, this is what I'm going to do in your culture. I told my wife the other day this. God is in control. That comforts me and that scares me. Because if God says, now is the time for America to give an accounting of its sins, we are headed for a bumpy ride. One voice will primarily influence, and I'm wrapping this up as fast as I can, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, I hope to be done. One voice will primarily influence our understanding of the good, and another one is Islam or Sharia law. Let me explain what that is. Oh, let me say this first. For the longest time, I was trying to unlock the puzzle of why is the left so enamored with Islam? Why are these college campuses, are these young people out there marching for Gaza, and they're all whipped up on all of this? And I think I've discovered the answer to that. Is because Islam fits the left's narrative that the West oppresses people of color through colonization. And that's exactly what has been preached about Gaza. And by the way, if you just look at the skin color, typically the Jews are of lighter skin than the Gazans. And there's this big argument about the colonization of Gaza. Actually, the land of Israel goes way, way back before there was any Arabs to take the parts of Israel that were partitioned after, 1946 or something like that. If you want to learn what the Quran and what Islam teaches, it says this in the Quran. I'm quoting it from the clear Quran. There's the Arabic, if you want to read it for yourself in Arabic. It says, listen to this. This is what the peaceful religion of Islam teaches. Fight those who do not believe in Allah and the last day, nor comply with what Allah and his messenger have forbidden. So they don't do what Muhammad says, nor embrace the religion of truth, Islam, from among those who were given the scriptures, Jews and Christians. If you don't convert to Islam, is that Islam teaches that that they should attack and fight against you. It says until they pay the tax. It's called the jizya. I know some people that are experts in the area of Islam. They can tell you more about this than I can. So they begin to pay an oppressive tax, and they're willingly submitting until fully humbled. We're going to put our boots on your neck, and yeah, you can still be a Christian or a Jew in Islam, but you're going to pay an oppressive tax for that. Here's what Sharia law teaches. The good, according to Muslims, is determined by the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sunnah, including harsh penalties for crimes, dress codes for women, polygamy, gender inequality, no freedom of religion or speech, harsh penalties for conversion or apostasy, blasphemy laws, censorship, strict dietary rules, heavy taxation, and oppression for non-Muslims, and so on. This is what you get if America turns Islamic. And you're seeing this more and more in Western countries like France and Britain because of lax immigration policies. One of these voices is going to be predominant in America. It's going to be the progressive left. It's going to be the progressive left guided by their vision of social justice. Islam guided by its vision of Sharia law. And that, or it's going to be natural law and Judeo-Christian values. You know who really helped me to understand this a lot more clearly is a Stanford professor by the name of Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She was born in Kenya, and she was raised under Islam, and she was forced to undergo female circumcision. It's more than what we can talk about in polite company. And so she eventually became a very vocal critic of Islam, and also a very strident atheist. There are the four horsemen of the apocalypse when it comes to atheism, and I can't remember, I get clouded in my thinking on some of these things, but I know it's Dawkins, I can see their faces, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and the other guy, oh, come on, I can't think of his name right now. But she was considered amongst the people who are shaping academia and are, the whole thoughts of anti-Christianity. She was the fifth member of that. She since has converted to Christianity because she understands, and I think rightfully so, that wokeism cannot stand in the encroaching presence of Islam, because wokeism at its center doesn't have the core belief of a God. It's just sheer political will and force, and it will yield to those who are motivated by an understanding of God. And so she has embraced now Christianity, and it's a voice. Even, by the way, Richard Dawkins, he says, culturally, I prefer Christianity, which I think is ironic. So natural law, according to, natural law with Judeo-Christian values, the good, according to that, is guided by Western values that provided the foundation for our democratic republic and recognized our inalienable God-given rights of everyone, Jew, Muslim, atheist, it doesn't matter. See, Christians do not compel religion in their society. There's the freedom of religion, but they also understand the rule of law. And so, additionally, certain freedoms are guaranteed to citizens as well as protection from the government and tyranny. No other political philosophy serves the good. I stand on that. No other political philosophy serves the good, since all competing political philosophies are simply power grabs. That's all they... And that's what the progressive left is, and that's what Islam is. It's a power grab, and I would be happy to defend that position. Objective truth entails a concept of the good. What do I mean by that? It's just simply this. It's a myth. It's a myth to believe that any political viewpoint can be morally inclusive across the board. It cannot be. It has to be exclusive. Regardless of which viewpoint wins the day politically, progressivism, Islamic law, or natural law coupled with Judeo-Christian values, they all believe in an absolute good. That's foundational to lawmaking. However, there's a name for it when any political policy departs from reality, when policy subverts the good, and it's called tyranny. That's what tyranny is. To compel any good that's not really the good is tyranny. What is tyranny? Well, our founders knew what it was. King George came along, and what he did is that he forced the colonies to violate principles that were not... They violated their moral principles and inherent rights that are granted by divine authority. So in other words, forget you, King George. We're following a higher authority than you. When a government disregards the good, like King George did, then it moves towards tyranny. That's what I'm seeing in America, by the way. You can disagree. It's just that's opinion there. Is that, and here's some of the big colonial issues. Abusive taxation. When politicians in America start telling me that I'm going to have to pay for, use my tax money to support people in our country who are here illegally, that's tyranny. You know, to help them to buy homes or to food and shelter them or to grant them health care and to deprive that of our citizens, that's tyranny. When government says that we're going to start to tax your unrealized capital gains, that's tyranny. When government starts to suppress our freedoms, or when there's a lack of judicial fairness, you know, pay attention to what's going on in our culture today, or even political manipulation. This was all going on in the colonies, and you know what? This is all going on in our society right now. Abusive taxation, suppression of freedoms, lack of judicial fairness, and political manipulation. Only one voice steers us away from tyranny, and that's not the progressive left, it's not Sharia law, but it's natural law with Judeo-Christian values. Let me conclude by saying this. When it comes to your politics, practice principled politics. Support candidates who honor the principles upon which our great nation was founded, and consider whether a candidate's policies are in keeping with the good, as informed by natural law and Judeo-Christian values. Any candidate who rejects, who departs from these, you need to know that a vote for that candidate will lead us further down the road to tyranny. Patrick Henry said this, "Bad men cannot make good citizens. It is when a people forget God that tyrants forge their chains." So who are you going to choose? I'll let you decide for yourself. I'm not going to endorse one candidate or the other. I want you to think about these things, but I do want you to ask this question. Which candidate's policies best fit with our country's founding principles? And then vote accordingly. If you want a guide, this isn't what we produced, but Samaritan's Purse has produced. And I'm not going to say that you're going to agree with everything that you find in this voter's guide, is that I'll send the link to you where you can review it and judge for yourself. And you can request that guide at 951-588-5444. It's there on the screen. I didn't say it right. All you have to do is text the word guide, and I'll send you the link. Secondly, is that if you want this presentation, I will send you a PDF of this presentation. You can review it. You can adapt it for your own use and purposes. Or email me at compass.info@compasschristianchurch.org. Finally, let me say this. I encourage every Christian to get out there and vote your principles. But I also encourage you that if anything made sense, what I said today, go to YouTube and share this presentation with as many people as you can and encourage them to review it, think about it, and then vote accordingly. Thank you for your time and patience. That ends our broadcast today. Okay? All right, good. Now, for those of you who are here, we're going to switch gears, and we are going to observe communion. And let's go ahead and do that at this time. Father in heaven, thank you for the privilege of